And now it's time for some deaf culture as I share some perspective. Let's talk about deafness. How do people become deaf? That's a common question. And there's different ways people become deaf. There isn't just one specific way. So I'll give you a general idea. One common way is people are just born genetically deaf, and it's passed down through family members. And that was the case from my parents to me, and I've passed it to my children, who'll pass it to theirs, and it will carry on that way. A second way, some people are born hearing, and they become deaf. They have an illness, or some people actually were born, especially in the 1950s and 60s, rubella and measles. That caused deafness in a lot of people. A third way, people are born hearing, and then later in life, that hearing declines. And so that really is a general explanation of how people become deaf or lose their hearing in life. Now, the word deaf, what does it mean? Does it mean everybody can't hear at all? Well, no. There's still some people that have some type of hearing loss, but they still identify themselves as deaf. Let's use me, for example. When I was born, I was born into a deaf family. I thought like a deaf person. My mother and father signed, and I learned my language from them. So I was raised with that identity. I'm a deaf person. But you see, my mother and father looked at me and said, oh, he has some hearing, so he must be a hearing child. And in fact, they put me into a regular hearing school. And it wasn't until later on that the teacher realized, yeah, he has some type of hearing loss. They went and scheduled a hearing screening test and labeled me as hard of hearing. So at that point, they moved me into a deaf school. So that was my situation back then. Oh, today's technology is much different. As soon as children are born, now it's required to take a hearing test. And that's great because it really encourages that language development at an early age. So if you're wondering, how do people become deaf? Really, there is no exact answer as to how a person became deaf. It could vary between the age they became deaf and they were hearing and now they don't hear as much. Don't be afraid to ask. It's not considered rude or offensive to ask. Deaf people will always be happy to answer the question. They'll either explain, oh, I was born deaf, or oh, I could hear until I was 2, and then something happened, or I became deaf later in life. But just to let you know, usually people that become deaf later in life, they usually don't identify themselves as deaf people. They don't like that word or that term. They prefer hearing loss. So that is one thing you have to be careful about. You can't label everybody as deaf because really those 3 groups of deafness are not really the same. They all have different perspectives on how they view themselves. So it's okay to ask, how did you lose your hearing? And if they answer later in life, then hearing impaired might be more appropriate. And it is a good question. A lot of times deaf people are very happy to share that information. It's a good conversation.